How and Why to Do Effective Inclusive Co-Design and Research with Della Churchill, Rachel Gallagher and Hannah Gossow. AliCamp 2022. AliCamp would like to thank our gold sponsors Intopia, Salesforce and Telstra, and silver sponsors ANZ, Deloitte Digital and Coles.
Hello and welcome to our Deloitte Digital presentation for AliCamp 2022. Our presentation is on how and why to do effective, inclusive co-design and research. We're practicing inclusive facilitation, so we'll be telling you when the signs change, like now. First, we'll have some introductions. I'm Della Churchill. I lead Deloitte Digital's Customer Strategy and Design team in Brisbane. I co-lead our National Diversity, Equity and Inclusion team, which I'll be referring to as DEI from now on. And I'm also a sponsor of our inclusive design offering. If you've not heard of us, Deloitte Digital is an experience consultancy that creates positive change by elevating the human experience with connected ideas, technology, and talent. I'm a mid-50s Caucasian woman with short dark hair and glasses. All the Deloitte team today had the same background of a large window and a brick wall with our company logo and our names on it. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Della. Hello, I'm Rachel. I'm a woman in my 30s with long brown hair. I'm based in Sydney and I'm part of the Customer Strategy and Design team at Deloitte Digital. And Hannah?
Hello, I'm Hannah. I'm a Caucasian woman in my late 20s with long brown to blonde hair. I'm a user experience designer at Deloitte Digital and I'm passionate about inclusive design and accessibility. I'll be changing my slides now.
Thanks, Hannah. First, we'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Hannah and I are on Yagara and Turrbal country today in Brisbane, and Rachel is on Gadi land in Sydney. We'll be changing the slide. Today, we'll be talking to you about three things. Why organisations should invest time to consider diversity and inclusion. We'll be sharing an example from Queensland's Transport and Main Roads Department. We'll next talk about best practice for inclusion and accessible research and co-design, and end with some facilitation tips for diverse, accessible and inclusive co-design. Changing the slide. Let's start by looking at who is impacted by diversity, equity and inclusion issues. People may face barriers that are permanent, temporary or situational. This is illustrated by the diagram on the left. It uses the instance of touch, where somebody may be permanently disabled by having one arm, temporarily disabled by having an arm injury, or situationally disabled. They're a new parent carrying a baby. And we take those diagrams from the Microsoft Persona Spectrum. On the right side is the diagram, which shows how people may face exclusion or inequity due to a range of factors. This is illustrated by a person being in the centre of a circle and around them a number of different icons representing those factors. Those factors are education, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, race and ethnicity, language, familial status, socioeconomic status, religious beliefs, geographic location, and ability. It's a lot to think about, but it's very important as we go through to consider these on each and every project that we do. We're changing the slide. Here we're looking at the models of disability. There are a number of different models for this, but we think it's important to look at the main two, the medical model and the social model. The medical model says that people are disabled by their impairments, whereas the social model says society disables people by putting up barriers. This is illustrated on the left, the medical model, where the individual is in a circle and on their t-shirt is written the word, the problem. And the word problem is pointing arrows towards the individual. In the social model on the right, society is represented inside the circle and the person is in the middle with the word barriers around them, but the arrow goes out towards the barriers. Society is disabling those people by putting up barriers. The medical model can be useful sometimes for dealing with disabilities, but it's quite an outdated approach, whereas the social model allows us to question barriers that we wouldn't normally notice. Although these models may seem quite high level and vague, they're critical to defining a lot of the laws behind disabilities. Let's consider those as we keep going through. We're going to change the slide. So what are the organisational benefits of considering DEI in your products and services? We like to think of it in 3 different ways. There's value creation, risk reduction, and efficiency. On the screen, you'll see a representation of the factors inside those 3 areas. So why would a business care? Well, under value creation, it expands your audience, reaching a broader group of people regardless of race, gender, age, education, or technological literacy is a good thing, right? As is building a positive reputation when the public can see that you're trying to do the right thing. It also motivates the workforce. We also know that designing for the fringe often creates a better experience for the majority. So it helps to drive innovation. These are all value creators for the organisation. It also allows risk reduction. Protecting the reputation of a firm or a government is very important, as is reducing your legal risks. And let's face it, there is a lot of legislation and acts that compels organisations and governments to do the right thing in the DEI area now. Lastly is efficiency. It reduces the delivery cost and rework when you consider your DEI upfront. We're going to change the slide and I'll show you how that works. How does considering inclusive design and accessibility early increase efficiency? This table comes from a 2019 report from British Research. On the vertical is the relative cost of ensuring inclusive design and accessibility. On the horizontal are the different stages of creating products or services. And you'll see that the relative cost is quite low in the early stages of shaping and prototyping, but significantly steeper when you go to development and go live. This shows that it is significantly easier and more cost-effective to consider accessibility and inclusion from the start. The later it's considered, the more it costs to retrofit. Now Rachel's going to give you an example of a project with Transport and Main Roads in Queensland.
Thank you, Della. And moving on to the next slide. On this slide, we have a photo of 2 older women sitting at a table in wheelchairs, laughing over a cup of tea. The Department of Transport and Main Roads has a vision to create a single integrated transport network accessible to everyone. TMR also aspires to become a leader in the provision of dignified, accessible and inclusive transport products, services, information and infrastructure. Moving on to the next slide. We can see that TMR are on a journey to design accessible and inclusive digital products, like the picture on the left, where a lady in a wheelchair is using a ticket machine. Transport infrastructure, like the picture in the middle, showing railway signage and signals. And face-to-face service experiences, like the picture on the right, where a railway attendant has set up the ramp for a father to push his son onto the train. Moving on to the next slide. Our project purpose was to create an accessible and inclusive design guideline to be used by TMR employees and delivery partners. In this context, when we say accessible, we mean can everyone, regardless of race, gender, age, or ability, access the experience? When we say inclusive, we mean when they access the experience, do they feel welcome and supported? In the transport context, we also had to think about equivalent access, which refers to guidelines designed by the Australian Human Rights Commission to improve access to public transport as long as an equivalent standard of amenity, availability, comfort, convenience, dignity, cost, and safety is maintained. If we move on to the next slide, we're talking about our project. So the first phase of our project was the best practice research phase. We spent 3 weeks doing desktop research and uncovering local and global use cases of universal design, co-design, and equivalent access. We also had the opportunity to collaborate with CUDA, the Centre for Universal Design Australia. The outcome was a literature review that informed how the department could bring best practice into the design process. A key finding from this literature review was to align to the 8 goals of universal design where possible. As seen on the slide here, with the icons on the left and the definitions on the right, these are seen as body fit, comfort, awareness, understanding, wellness, social integration, personalization, and cultural appropriateness. If we move on to the next slide, we can see that we're in phase 2, our co-design phase. So over 6 weeks, we prepared 15 workshops with over 60 stakeholders from the Department of Transport and Main Roads, delivery partners, and Queenslanders with a Disability Network to inform the Accessible and Inclusive Design Guideline. So, what is co-design? Co-design brings people together with lived experiences and those with functional knowledge to jointly make decisions informed by each other's expertise. This needs to be embedded in the planning process, including the timing and the budget. When should you co-design? Early and often. When you co-design during the planning part of a project, it can help you understand the problem space. This drives greater transparency and sets the foundation for a fit-for-purpose solution informed by real-world data and experiences. Co-designing when you test and build products and services creates an opportunity to collaborate on solutions. Empathy for those diverse lived experiences will inspire better solutions, and gather feedback and testing ideas with a broad group de-risks your outcomes. Now remember, when you have a product and service in market, it's important to review the experiences with the people who use them, the people who don't use them to understand why not, and domain professionals to ensure that the solution is evolving to meet the future needs. Embedding co-design into the organisation culture drives innovation. At the department, we identified stakeholders who may have expert knowledge or lived experience with the transport network. We recommend engaging more than 10 people to ensure there's a broad spectrum of lived experience, for example, age, race, sex, ability, culture, and socioeconomic background, or even life stage. If customers are hard to source, customer service representatives are also very helpful. Through our co-design workshops, together we drafted the Accessible and Inclusive Design Guideline. This guideline is now being tested more broadly within the department so that it can be refined and published. We learned a lot during this phase, and Hannah's now going to take you through some of our key lessons learned about facilitation.
Thank you, Rachel. The slide will be changing. We learnt that designing with good intent is simply not good enough. Partnering with network groups and reference bodies ensures rich knowledge and experience is injected into design decision-making and avoids inadvertently creating new consequences for the people those products and services actually intend to serve. We learnt that undertaking co-design as early and as often as possible is imperative, and ideally engaging participants in the pre-project planning phase is crucial. Organisations need to co-design for diversity and lived experiences, considering thought, culture, identity, and ability, as not one single lived experience is the same, even if two people have the same impairment or disability. Participants need to be given a seat at the design table, and by that we mean providing space for people to come along in the design journey and actively contribute to the output. Providing a seat at the table means participants are actively engaged in providing solutions towards the design outcome. They are not merely providing suggestions, but are actively designing the solution with you. Setting clear expectations up front around the time required for successful co-design is critical, along with providing transparency around the input that will be used. Time considerations are crucial when co-designing, as co-design often takes longer than originally thought. Accommodating a wide range of needs and abilities often requires well-considered time, and bringing people with diverse experiences and knowledge often gives way to rich discussion and solutions and further problems that were not originally understood or thought about. It's important to also continue to close the loop, continuously iterate with participants, and provide continuous feedback and share insights. And lastly, it's best to consider taking an iterative approach. You're probably not going to get it right the first time. We certainly didn't, and in the nature of inclusive design, had to take an iterative approach to our co-design sessions. In the context of TMR, we learnt that instilling a genuine curiosity to learn about lived experiences with organisational culture and applying those lessons with rigour is important to shifting how products and services are designed for the public. We'll be changing the slide now. So how do we best engage participants for accessible and inclusive co-design? Firstly, it's important to identify possible participants, be curious about their needs and abilities, and then make appropriate adjustments to accommodate their needs. When identifying participants, it's important to think about who do you want to speak to? Who are you willing to include, or more importantly, exclude? And think about how many people you are realistically can recruit. What's an acceptable amount of diversity? It's important to intentionally diversify your participants. If your participants include a more diverse range of people, your product or design is more likely to be usable for a greater amount of the general population. It's also important to check bias towards approach and objective. One big bias we might have is focusing purely on the digital aspect of a service, but consider objectives outside of digital services. For instance, in a transport and main roads context, we needed to consider people's needs and abilities in the realm of face-to-face customer service and physical infrastructure. When creating a service, it's important to remember not everyone has the same preferences or abilities. Ensure you aren't actively excluding certain customer groups through a biased approach or objective. And if appropriate, use third-party organisations to recruit, which can help you include more commonly excluded groups within your research that may otherwise be harder to recruit. Secondly, be curious. Lean in and practice empathy as much as possible. Don't assume that you understand someone's abilities or lived experience based on their impairment or disability. Ask detailed questions. Ask participants about their needs and preferences well before the co-design session, and accept that you can't co-design with everyone. Unfortunately, no research or co-design can be perfectly inclusive. You can only do the best you can with the constraints you face. Thirdly, accommodate. Make adjustments to accommodate needs and abilities as much as possible. Think about how you can create an equal experience for your participants. Consider aspects before, during, after the session, such as their transport, translators, remote transcripts, and their accessibility features to the building. Ensure that participants are equally accommodated during all stages of the research and co-design journey. All participants should feel relaxed, calm, understood, and accommodated during the co-design process. Not only will this benefit the participants, but it will also benefit your design. Throughout co-design sessions with TMR, we made adjustments to suit specific needs of the people we were designing with. A particular example is that a participant was cognitively and neurologically diverse. And although we were aware of her impairment, we weren't aware that by changing the PowerPoint slides without any warning was triggering for her, and therefore she required warning before us switching. Small adjustments such as this can make a world of difference to your participants. When people feel supported and are comfortable in their environment, they're often more willing to share their vulnerabilities, which is where the richness in conversation and solution comes to life. We'll be changing the slide now. Finally, it's important to also build your awareness around the multitude of disabilities and impairments that exist. On this slide, there are 8 boxes with icons displaying different disabilities and impairments related to visual, deaf blindness, mobility, flexibility, and body structure, psychological and psychiatric, auditory, speech, cognitive, neurological, and seizures. The biggest point to make here is that not all disabilities are visible. What affects us the most in digital design will be visual, motor physical, and cognitive, learning and neurological. For our web application purposes, auditory and speech are less important, but still incredibly important in other areas of communication, like over the phone or in person. And when designing a holistic experience for anybody, it's important to consider a person's needs from all angles. It's also important to remember that any individual may have more than one of these disabilities. And as Della mentioned earlier, some of these disabilities and impairments may be permanent, temporary, or situational. We're changing the slide now. We thank you for joining us today. We hope you were able to take away some valuable insights on how and why to do effective, inclusive co-design and research. I'm Hannah from Deloitte Digital, and I was joined today by Rachel Gallagher and Della Churchill.
AliCamp 2022.